Yes, folks, that tweet from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson showing an image of a photoshopped Australian soldier slitting the throat of a young Afghan boy was truly grotesque and uncalled for. But there's much more to this story than meets the eye. How much of this story did Scott Morrison bring on himself, for example?
Now look, tonight China and Afghanistan come together. There is universal and understandable anger that a prominent Chinese official should share a fake image of an Australian digger threatening to slit the throat of an Afghan child. The image was shared by Beijing's foreign industry spokesman, Zhao Lijian, on Twitter. He was the man, by the way, who earlier this year described the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989 as simply a political disturbance. The Australian government has appealed to Twitter to directly remove the false image. Twitter to date have not responded.
Yes, and it's still there. Don't be afraid, we're coming to bring you peace. And you can see blood on the knife here. This is absolutely sickening.
Nonetheless, in a tweet accompanying the image, Mr. Zhao said, quote, "Shocked by the murder of Afghan civilians and prisoners by Australian soldiers, we strongly condemn such acts and call for holding them accountable." What did he say? Shocked by the murder of Afghan civilians and prisoners by Australian soldiers? That's a lie. Hasn't Twitter censored and refused to post almost anything Donald Trump has said, arguing it was a lie? So Chinese lie is fine, but anything Donald Trump, delete.
Exactly. Typical doublethink.
Nonetheless, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "It's deeply offensive to every Australian who served in that uniform, every Australian who serves in that uniform today. It is utterly outrageous and can't be justified." Now, hang on a minute. Before we get ahead of ourselves, of course everyone is outraged. But the question we have to ask is, what gave rise to this? The Prime Minister described the fake image as repugnant. Am I the only person who found that the Prime Minister's reference to this Brereton report into our brave men in Afghanistan, our Prime Minister told the world without reading the report that we would be shocked by brutal truths? Prime Minister, may I use your words? Your reference to brutal truths, quote, is deeply offensive to every Australian who served in that uniform, every Australian who serves in that uniform today. It is utterly outrageous and can't be justified, unquote. If this political bushfire is out of control, who lit the match? A Prime Minister who told the world of brutal truths, that our men at war, the best of the best, murder innocent people. The Prime Minister boasted that he'd apologised to the President of Afghanistan for the contents of a report that he hadn't read.
Well, Morrison apologised to Afghanistan before even reading the report. Talk about shooting from the hip.
And the Defence Chief talked about stripping the medals from all who served, proof to the world of criminal behaviour. These comments have gone around the world. The Foreign Minister has apologised to Afghanistan for, quote, our misconduct. The head of Defence, Campbell, has said that Afghan families will be compensated, and he apologised for shameful findings. Yep, the fake image of the Australian digger threatening to slit the throat of an Afghan child is disgusting and repugnant. But, Prime Minister, you're asking China to apologise? When will you apologise for your language and that of your generals that condemned all our men in Afghanistan to the charge of criminal behaviour from a report you haven't read and before any of them has access to the law? Therefore, Prime Minister, at this point, until it can be proven otherwise, they are innocent.
Exactly. Anyway, now let's get an overview of that report.
There's shock, anger and sadness within the Australian Defence Force and across the country after serious allegations of war crimes by our elite soldiers in Afghanistan were made public today.
Rules were broken, stories concocted, lies told, and prisoners killed. This shameful record includes alleged instances in which new patrol members were coerced to shoot a prisoner in order to achieve that soldier's first kill in an appalling practice known as blooding. Throwdown weapons and radios were also reportedly planted to support claims that people killed were enemy killed in action.
For more, I'm joined by political correspondent Rob Scott in Canberra. Rob, good evening. These are horrific allegations. Take us through what the report has found.
Good evening, Michael. Well, the report has uncovered some chilling details and a culture of secrecy, lies and rule-breaking. And with that, some very disturbing conduct allegedly committed...
Allegedly?
...in the main by our elite SAS troops. The report detailed so-called credible information that 39 Afghans were killed in 23 incidents by 25 soldiers. 19 of those could now face criminal charges. All those killed were prisoners, farmers or other civilians, some of them just adolescents.
Yeah, so you can clearly see where the tweet came from. But it's all alleged, so none of it is true at this stage. So the tweet is a lie and Twitter left it there.
And not in the heat of battle, but rather in cold blood. The report alleges, as we've just heard, there were times when members of the Special Operations Task Group planted weapons on the bodies of those they'd killed to avoid scrutiny. And the inquiry was also highly critical of patrol commanders, detailing how they fostered what's been described as a self-centred warrior culture in which they were treated like demigods. Now, for some, it'll be hard to believe that these decorated heroes now stand accused of being war criminals.
So what is set to happen now, Rob?
Well, Michael, for starters, the Chief of the Army today ordered the SAS 2nd Squadron be disbanded and struck off the Army's order of battle. The Defence Chief Angus Campbell apologised to the families of the victims and to the Australian people and recommended that all meritorious unit citations awarded to SAS and commandos in Afghanistan between 2007 and 2013 be revoked. But as you can imagine, that has not gone down well with former SAS soldiers.
He has acted to punish the many for the actions of a few, and those many include 20 fallen veterans.
Disgraceful. Now that report only tells one side of the story.
Lister, I have not, because of the efforts of so many and generations before me, some of them family members who've stood in my name in other places, I have not had to face that kind of circumstance, and I'm grateful for that. I just simply say I am troubled by the idea of academics, well-qualified, bureaucrats, well-qualified, and some military are going to inquire into all this sort of thing. I hope they get the values and the principles and the support for these guys right. I just find the whole thing sad and demeaning, and very sad and demeaning.
Indeed. I've actually questioned over the last few days, just to myself, whether this is actually in the national interest, if this is in the public interest to be brought out and have this dirty laundry aired. We know this is not something systemic in our ADF. This is something. There's a small group of individuals. Clearly, we don't yet know the details that have committed atrocities. But I'd love to echo what Fitzgibbon said, and he himself is a former Minister of Defence, and he said these guys were deployed for too long and on back-to-back deployments. And as you've said, Gary, you and I and millions of Australian civilians have absolutely no idea what that's like. And we have no idea what that's like thanks to these men and women who go and do it for us so that we can sleep in our beds every night knowing that we're safe. And even I, though, being a civilian as I am, I'm not above wondering. I don't think any of us can be above saying I would never do this or I would never do that after what these people have been through. Mr.
Yes, exactly. We have no idea what it's like to go through what they go through every day of the week.
Senator Roberts just raised Andrew Hastie, member for Canning. And I remember reading years ago, it would have been, because he was quite new to Parliament at the time, and he won't mind me sharing because this is on the public record, he shared it himself, that even as he was doing his training, these grueling days and days on end that they'd be sent on to have to undergo unspeakable, not only temperatures, but conditions, no sleep for days on end, all the rest of it. And he shared coming back from this particular training trip, just sobbing down the end of the line to his lovely wife, Ruth. The stuff these guys go through breaks them.
Yep.
It absolutely breaks them, and I'm not making excuses for atrocities they may have committed in the line of duty, but we have to keep that in mind, that human beings cannot go through prolonged periods of these high pressure, no sleep, adrenaline running through your veins 24/7, that kind of fear, the environment we can't even imagine for days on end and then still function properly. They just can't.
And well, Gary, if you don't mind me jumping in, I think there's something... I think there's another factor here too that we must...
Brom, I'll let Malcolm just get one line in and I'll come to you.
Yeah, that's something you mentioned in the material you sent out, and that is that there's a catch and release policy for people. You can't hold them, you can't detain them. So some of these people were out to kill our soldiers. They catch them, our soldiers catch them, and then have to let them go again because it's not a proper theatre of war. I know that if I was under that scenario, I'd be thinking twice about letting them go. And there's...
Yeah, same here. Why would you free people, the enemy, who are going to come back and kill you? It's absurd.
Nowhere to keep them. What else are you going to do? You know, when people's minds are under that much stress, Brom and Gary, you know, we've got to be understanding and compassionate about that.
And Brom, and I think, and I don't mean to demean my sincerity at all, but I think about Jack Nicholson's line in A Few Good Men, you know, can we handle the truth? I mean, it's kind of, I guess, if they've done the wrong thing, the system will out, but I am concerned about it.
Gary, I sat in that Parliament, in the House of Representatives, as we stood again and again mourning the death of a soldier in Afghanistan. And we made grave speeches about their sacrifice for us, the way they represented us. We, as a people, our governments, both Labor and Liberal, sent those men to fight for our principles in a foreign land. And as I said, we eulogised and spoke of them. I even attended ramp ceremonies when those bodies were returned to Australia. And yet this same government that we sent to fight for us is now attacking our own people, our own soldiers.
Disgusting.
I worked as hard as I could not to have Australia sign up to the International Criminal Court because I could see how it could be used against us as a matter of international propaganda. But the reality was that Alexander Downer had virtually committed us, but one thing I did get added was a footnote that said we would never hand over any of our soldiers to that court, which is the threat that is held over if we don't investigate, they'll do. But I insisted that went in. Now let's look what's happened. Mr. Justice Legay-Brereton, Major General Legay-Brereton, a former commander of the 5th Brigade, the 2nd Division, has spent 4 years investigating these issues. 4 years. That investigation actually advertised in Afghanistan for Afghanis to come forward and testify or give evidence against our soldiers. We paid for people to go there to try and find people who would either tell the truth or tell lies. How do we know?
Exactly.
Unbelievable.
4 years this has gone on, and those men have lived with that for these 4 years. We are now told that there is a report that's going to be released, which we will find shocking. Peter Jennings has very wisely warned that this will be used by ISIS in a recruiting program for them.
Exactly.
To say they're justified in taking the lives of Australians. And that will be civilian as well as military people. We are hanging these people out to dry and saying that the response is we will have a further investigation. And that investigation will see whether or not there should be any prosecutions in line with the requirements under the ICC. We will never hand over any of our soldiers to that court for them to make the investigation. And if you take a look at who sits on it and would be sitting in judgment on us, I just get anger, which is beyond belief. So can I say that we have a huge obligation to the men and women who serve. 29,000 people have served in Afghanistan. When I was Minister for Defence, Industry, Science and Personnel, we didn't send many people overseas at all. It was into Bosnia then, and they had to go via being seconded into the British Army, and then they could go across and fight. But the long and the short of it is that they have worn our uniform under our flag to support our values. Now, our values are important.
Exactly.
But for the government to turn on our soldiers and to hold them up through this period, we have had something like, we have lost more soldiers in the years we've been in Afghanistan to suicide than we lost in combat.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So just understand the stresses that they're under, and understand one more point. The rules under which they fight are called terms of engagement. And they literally write down what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And then there is a definition of what is an atrocity or what is a war crime set out in the ICC. And this is what is almost like being told you go there to fight with one arm behind your back.
Yeah, absolute hopelessness. Now, folks, I think the bigger question is this. Why are Western soldiers there in the first place? Let them fight amongst themselves, because that is exactly what they're going to do as soon as the American troops pull out. Nation building is just an expensive pipe dream.